Have you noticed how you care less about being right and more about being at peace? It's a subtle shift that happens somewhere along the journey after 70. That moment when you realize your energy is too precious to waste on things that won't matter tomorrow. That calm awareness when you understand that not every battle deserves your breath. For decades, many of us have lived our lives in constant motion, explaining ourselves, justifying our choices, rushing to meet everyone's expectations. We've maintained relationships that drained us, attended events that exhausted us, and engaged in arguments that never really changed anyone's mind. But something beautiful happens when we cross into our 70s. Something shifts, the noise starts to fade, and a different kind of wisdom emerges. Today, I want to talk about what real peace looks like in your golden years. Not the passive peace that comes from surrender, but the active peace that comes from wisdom. The kind of peace that doesn't diminish you, but instead reveals who you've been all along. Peaceful aging is not passive. It's not about fading away or becoming less engaged with life. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Peaceful aging is a sign of deep internal wisdom. It's the culmination of decades of learning what truly matters and, more importantly, what doesn't. In this video, we'll explore 5 subtle but powerful signs that show you are aging with dignity, peace, and inner mastery. These aren't signs of decline. They're signs of elevation. They show that you've risen above the noise that consumes younger generations. They reveal that you've earned a perspective that only comes with time. Now, you might recognize some of these signs in yourself already, or perhaps they'll serve as gentle reminders of the direction you want to move toward. Either way, they're not about age as a number. They're about age as wisdom. Before we begin, I want you to understand something important. Peace is not a passive state. It's an active choice you make every day. It's a practice. And the 5 signs we're about to discuss are evidence that you're practicing it well. Let's explore these 5 signs together and discover what they reveal about the beautiful journey of aging with peace and purpose after 70. Sign 1, you no longer rush. Time has a funny way of changing as we age. When we're young, we're always in a hurry, rushing from one appointment to the next, cramming our schedules with activities, multitasking until we collapse from exhaustion. We wear busyness like a badge of honor. "I'm so busy" becomes our mantra, as if being constantly occupied somehow proves our worth. But somewhere after 70, something profound happens. We begin to understand that time isn't something to race against. It's something to move with, gracefully and intentionally. Take Eleanor, for example. At 74, Eleanor has discovered a new relationship with time. For most of her life, Eleanor was known for her punctuality and precision. As a retired school administrator, she had scheduled her days down to the minute. Her calendar was always full, her to-do lists were always long, and being late was simply not an option. "I lived by the clock," Eleanor told me. "I was always 5 minutes early to everything. I would get anxious if I thought I might be late, and I packed my days so full that I barely had time to breathe." But last year, something shifted for Eleanor. After a minor health scare, nothing serious but enough to make her pause, she began to question this lifelong habit of rushing. One morning, I was rushing to get to my volunteer shift at the library, and I suddenly asked myself, why am I running? What will happen if I'm 10 minutes late? Will the world end? That simple question changed everything for Eleanor. She decided to experiment with unscheduling parts of her day. She began to enjoy slow breakfasts on her porch, watching the birds without checking her watch. She started taking the scenic route to her appointments. She allowed conversations to unfold without glancing at the clock. Now, I schedule at most 1 or 2 things a day, she says with a smile. I leave space between appointments. I've discovered that life doesn't need to be full to be fulfilling. The change in Eleanor wasn't about becoming lazy or disengaged. It was about recognizing that at this stage of life, presence trumps productivity, quality overshadows quantity, and peace flourishes in the spaces between activities. The takeaway is simple but profound. Peace begins when urgency ends. When you notice yourself no longer rushing, when you find yourself taking the slower path, enjoying the journey rather than focusing solely on the destination, that's not a sign of slowing down. That's a sign of wisdom. That's a sign that you've learned to value the moment you're in more than the moment you're rushing toward. Eleanor realized that life doesn't need to be full to be fulfilling. And in that realization, she found a peace that no amount of productive busyness could ever provide. Sign 2. You choose silence over argument. The second sign that you're aging peacefully is perhaps one of the most powerful. You've learned to choose silence over argument. Think about how much energy we've all wasted over the years trying to convince others that we're right. The heated family discussions that turned into arguments. The political debates with neighbors that changed no one's mind. The need to have the last word, to prove our point, to show others the error of their ways. But with age comes a remarkable insight. Winning an argument rarely leads to winning peace of mind. James, at 70, embodies this wisdom beautifully. After a successful career as an attorney where arguing was literally his profession, James has discovered the power of strategic silence. I spent 40 years arguing for a living, James says. I was good at it. I could find the weakness in any position, counter any point. But somewhere along the way, I realized that even when I won an argument, I often lost something more valuable: connection, energy, peace. Now, when James finds himself in situations that might once have triggered his argumentative nature, a political comment at a dinner party, a factual error in conversation, or even a direct provocation, he responds differently. Last month, my neighbor made some comments about my lawn that would have once sent me into a defensive tirade, James recalls with a chuckle. Instead, I just smiled and said, "You might be right." And then I went home and enjoyed my evening. This wasn't about avoiding conflict out of fear. It was about choosing peace out of wisdom. James had learned that his energy was sacred, especially at this stage of life, and not every provocation deserved his response. The takeaway is clear. You don't need to win to be wise. When you choose silence, you're not surrendering. You're elevating. You're recognizing that peace of mind is more valuable than proving a point. You're acknowledging that not every thought needs to be expressed, and not every statement needs to be corrected. For James, his silence became his strongest response, not because he couldn't argue, but because he no longer needed to. And in that choice, he found a freedom that no debate victory could ever provide. Sign 3, you value fewer, deeper relationships. As we journey through life, our social circles naturally evolve. In our younger years, many of us measure our social success by the breadth of our connections, how many friends we have, how large our network is, how many holiday cards we send out. But the third sign of peaceful aging is a profound shift in how we approach relationships, focusing on depth rather than breadth. Minji, at 68, discovered this wisdom through a deliberate process of reflection. As a former marketing executive who prided herself on her extensive professional and social network, Minji used to maintain connections with hundreds of people. I was always the one with the fullest contact list, Minji recalls. I'd pride myself on remembering everyone's birthdays, sending thoughtful gifts, keeping up with everyone's lives. It was exhausting, but I thought that's what it meant to be a good friend and colleague. After retiring, Minji continued this pattern for a while. She'd attend every social gathering, maintain correspondence with former colleagues, and try to nurture her vast network. But gradually, she began to notice something. Not all of these relationships gave her energy. In fact, many of them left her feeling drained. I started to pay attention to how I felt after spending time with different people, she explains. Some interactions left me feeling inspired and alive. Others left me feeling exhausted and depleted, even if they were perfectly pleasant people. This awareness led Minji to make a conscious decision. She began to distance herself from relationships that drained her energy, even when there was no obvious conflict or problem. Instead, she focused her time and attention on the relationships that truly nourished her spirit. Her granddaughter, who visited twice a week for Korean cooking lessons. Her 2 neighbors, who shared her passion for gardening, and a small group of longtime friends who had grown alongside her through life's challenges. Now, I probably actively maintain maybe 10 relationships, Minji says. That might sound small compared to my previous social life, but the depth of these connections brings me more joy than 100 shallow ones ever did. The takeaway is powerful. Depth beats noise. When you notice yourself gravitating toward fewer, deeper relationships, when you find yourself untroubled by declining some social invitations or letting certain connections naturally fade, that's not a sign of becoming antisocial. It's a sign that you've learned to value quality over quantity in your human connections. Minji chose presence over popularity. She discovered that being fully present with a few beloved people brought more peace than being partially present with many. And in that choice, she found a richness in her relationships that her formerly busy social calendar never provided. Sign 4. You feel grateful more than bitter. Life, by its very nature, gives us plenty of reasons to feel bitter as we age. The career opportunities that never materialized, the relationships that ended painfully, the health challenges that arrived uninvited. the dreams that remained unfulfilled. It's easy, even natural, to carry these disappointments with us, allowing them to color our perspective on life. But the fourth sign of peaceful aging is the ability to choose gratitude over bitterness, not as a naive form of positive thinking, but as a deliberate, wise choice. Carlos, at 73, embodies this transformation. For 4 decades, Carlos carried the weight of a painful family rift. His younger brother had betrayed him in a business venture when Carlos was in his 30s, costing him not only significant money, but also his reputation in their community. I carried that anger for 40 years, Carlos admits. I rehearsed what I would say to him if we ever spoke again. I imagined scenarios where he would finally admit how wrong he had been. That bitterness became part of my identity. Carlos and his brother lived in the same city, but managed to avoid each other for decades. Family gatherings were carefully orchestrated to ensure they wouldn't cross paths. But when Carlos turned 73, he received news that his brother had been diagnosed with a serious illness. Something shifted in me when I heard about his health, Carlos explains. All those rehearsed speeches, all those fantasies of vindication, they suddenly seemed so pointless. I realized I didn't want to carry this weight anymore. Carlos reached out to his brother, not with expectations of apologies or explanations, but simply with an offer to reconnect. Their first meeting was awkward but civil. Their second was warmer. By the third, they were reminiscing about their childhood. Did he ever fully acknowledge what he did? Not really. Does that still bother me sometimes? Of course, Carlos says, but I've discovered something more important than being right, being free. I forgave him not to fix our past, but to liberate my future. The takeaway is transformative. Letting go is peace in action. When you notice yourself dwelling more on what you're grateful for than what you're bitter about, when you find yourself able to release old grudges, not because they don't matter, but because your peace matters more, that's not a sign of weakness. That's a sign of profound strength. Carlos gave himself the gift of release. He discovered that forgiveness isn't about condoning the past. It's about freeing yourself from its grip. And in that freedom, he found a peace that 40 years of justified anger had never been able to provide. Sign 5. You stop explaining yourself. Throughout much of our lives, we feel an obligation to explain our choices, to justify why we can't attend an event, to elaborate on why we hold certain opinions, to defend our boundaries as if they require defense. This habit of explanation often stems from a deep-seated belief that our choices are only valid if others understand and approve of them. But the fifth sign of peaceful aging is the quiet confidence to make choices without feeling compelled to explain them. Sandra, at 76, discovered this freedom after decades of over-explaining herself. As a former nurse and mother of 4, Sandra had spent most of her life prioritizing others' needs and feelings above her own. I was always the reliable one, the one who would drop everything to help others, Sandra reflects. And on the rare occasions when I couldn't or didn't want to do something, I felt this overwhelming need to explain why. I'd give elaborate reasons, sometimes even exaggerating health concerns to make my no seem more acceptable. This pattern continued into her retirement. If she didn't want to attend a community function, she'd invent a conflicting appointment. If she needed to rest instead of babysitting her grandchildren, she claimed to have other obligations. Her no always came with an explanation, as if a simple preference wasn't enough. But at 76, Sandra had an epiphany while reading a book about boundaries. The author wrote something that stopped me in my tracks. No is a complete sentence. It hit me that I'd been explaining myself my entire life, as if my choices weren't valid unless others approved of my reasons. Sandra began to experiment with simpler responses. When invited to events that didn't appeal to her, she simply said, "Thank you for thinking of me, but I won't be able to attend." When asked to take on responsibilities she didn't want, she replied, "I'm not available for that." No explanations, no justifications, just clear, kind boundaries. The first few times I felt almost physically ill with anxiety, Sandra admits. I was sure people would demand explanations or be upset with me. But something remarkable happened. Most people just accepted my response. And the few who did push for explanations made me realize that was about them, not me. The takeaway is liberating. Explanation is optional. Self-respect is essential. When you notice yourself no longer feeling compelled to justify your choices, when you find yourself able to decline invitations or set boundaries without elaborate explanations, that's not a sign of becoming rude or dismissive. It's a sign that you've developed a healthy self-respect that doesn't require external validation. Sandra realized she owed no one an apology for protecting her peace. And in claiming that truth, she found a freedom that decades of people-pleasing had never allowed her to experience. As we reflect on these 5 signs, no longer rushing, choosing silence over argument, valuing fewer and deeper relationships, feeling grateful rather than bitter, and stopping the habit of explaining yourself, a deeper truth emerges. Peaceful aging isn't about becoming less. It's about becoming more selective. This distinction is crucial. Many fear that aging means diminishment, a gradual fading away from life's vibrancy. But the wisdom we're discussing today points to something. As we consider these 5 signs of peaceful aging, I invite you to reflect on your own journey. Which of these signs are already showing up in your life? Which ones feel like areas where you might still be holding on to older patterns? Perhaps you still feel the need to rush, filling your days with activity to feel productive. Maybe you still get drawn into arguments, feeling that inner pull to correct, convince, or prove your point. You might still maintain relationships that drain more than they nourish, out of habit or obligation. Perhaps old resentments still occupy more of your emotional space than gratitude. Or maybe you still find yourself over-explaining your choices, seeking approval or understanding from others. Wherever you are on this journey, remember that peaceful aging is not an achievement with a finish line. It's a practice, a daily choice, a gradual unfolding of wisdom. Consider where you might choose peace today over people-pleasing. Is there a commitment you can decline without explanation? a potential argument you can meet with no in silence, a relationship that might benefit from more depth, or perhaps one that needs to gently fade, an old resentment you're ready to release. Start with one boundary, one breath, one no. That's where peace begins. It doesn't require grand gestures or dramatic changes. Peace grows in the small choices, the subtle shifts in how we engage with our world. And remember, choosing peace isn't selfish. When you age peacefully, you become a living example of wisdom for younger generations. Your calm presence, your freedom from unnecessary urgency and conflict, your depth of gratitude. These become quiet teachings for everyone around you. Conclusion with engagement, 1 to 2 minutes. As we come to the close of our time together, I want to leave you with this thought. If you're slowing down, choosing silence, and letting go, you're not disappearing. You're becoming who you were always meant to be. The 5 signs we've explored today, no longer rushing, choosing silence over argument, valuing fewer and deeper relationships, feeling grateful rather than bitter, and stopping the habit of explaining yourself. These aren't signs of withdrawal from life. They're signs of engaging with life on wiser, more peaceful terms. Eleanor, James, Minji, Carlos, and Sandra aren't fading away as they age. They're emerging more clearly as their authentic selves, unburdened by the expectations and habits that once limited their peace. This is the privilege and power of aging, the freedom to finally become who you truly are, to live by your own wisdom rather than others' expectations. If any of these signs resonated with you, I'd love to hear about it. Comment, "I choose peace" below, and share which of these 5 signs you recognize in yourself, or which one you're working to develop. And if you found value in today's exploration of peaceful aging, please consider subscribing to our channel for more timeless wisdom. Together, we're building a community that honors the gifts and insights that come with age. Until next time, remember, peace isn't passive. It's the active choice of a wise heart. And that choice is always available to you, breath by breath, moment by moment, day by day. Thank you for sharing this time with me. May your journey after 70 be filled with the deepest peace and the truest joy.